Welcome back. In this session, we are going to take a small deviation, going to discuss about various file formats that are frequently used in big data softwares or big data applications. If you take any big data application developed using Hadoop, you might be frequently seeing CSV, JSON, and Apache Parquet, along with various other file formats where the data is stored in the HDFS, and you might be reading the data from the files in HDFS to do the processing. Similarly, when you go to Spark, the data might be in a different source system. It might be present in a SQL database, and you would like to pull the data. And sometimes the data might be sent by a upstream team in the form of CSV files or JSON files. Sometimes the data might be sent by a web application in the form of JSON files. So CSV, JSON, and Apache Parquet are the three file formats that are very much widely used, and Parquet is the best among us them, which is very widely known in big data ecosystem. Let's try to understand about CSV first. CSV, JSON, and Parquet are popular file formats for storing data, each with unique characteristics. Categorization. So when you take CSV file formats, majority of people call it as structured file format, but there is also a notion that it can also be called a semi-structured file format because of no metadata being stored in the file itself. But the data is properly organized into rows and columns when viewed in an Excel file or any other Excel-like software. Now, moving on to JSON. JSON is a semi-structured file format similar to HTML, where the data is stored in the form of keys and value pairs. Now, JSON is very much widely used in web applications to transfer the data over the networks. And finally, Apache Parquet. Apache Parquet is designed specifically for big data applications, keeping in mind that we need efficient way of reading and writing the data, as well as we need an efficient way of compressing the data so that we can save storage costs while storing the data in the underlying storage systems. So the categorization for these file formats are as follows. Let's go deep about CSV file format. CSV files are structured as they represent data in a tabular format with a fixed number of columns and defined rows. Each line in a CSV file corresponds to a row in the table, and each field in a line is a cell in the table. The structure is simple and consistent, although CSV files do not enforce specific data types or any particular relationship between files, which means in the previous session, we tried to read a particular file called California Housing Test. So if you take this particular file, the data is properly displayed in the form of rows and columns. And if you download this particular file and try to open this in a software like Sublime or Visual Studio or maybe something like Notepad++, the data is properly visible in the form of plain text where each and every record or every value of a particular column is separated by a particular separator. So when you're talking about CSV or TSV or text files, basically what you're trying to say is each and every piece of word or piece of token is divided or separated by a separator character, like a comma, sometimes pipe, or sometimes a custom delimiter as well. And end of lines are separated by a specific delimiter. Now, this is the example of a CSV file. Since you are viewing this in Google Colab, and since Google Colab has a default way of viewing the CSV files in the form of a tabular format, we are able to see this something like this. But if you download this and if you try to view this in a software like Sublime, then you'll be able to see that in its own structure where everything is readable. So that's pretty much it. Now, moving on, JSON file format. So this data as a collection of key value pairs, making it flexible to represent a variety of data structures. It can represent hierarchical or nested data, which is not strictly tabular, but still has some level of organization and structure. JSON format can accommodate a wide range of data types and structures, which makes it more flexible than CSV, but less structured than traditional database systems. So unlike a CSV file format, which has fixed set of column length and fixed set of field values for each and for the corresponding columns. JSON do not have a fixed structure. It can have nested data structures within each, and it can represent hierarchical and nested data very much efficiently. And if you want a real-time example of how JSON looks, let's take this example here. If you take this example, this is a simple notation of JSON. And there is a key called menu, which has its value as another nested JSON structure. And this nested JSON structure again has keys and values, and it can have multiple internal nested JSON structures. So it can represent different types of data types, strings. Sometimes we can also represent integer numbers within the JSON, or we can also represent some of the complex data structures like arrays uh, within the JSON. So like a list of items. So we can do all of that using JSON. We can easily represent that. And as I mentioned, JSON is basically uh, an upgraded version of XML. XML is a bit tricky to write or represent, but JSON is very simple to represent our JavaScript object notation. I mean, whatever the things that we would like to represent. Now, moving on, Apache Parquet. Now, Parquet is a columnar file format, making it highly structured. What do I mean by that? So basically, Apache Parquet is highly designed to efficiently store and process large volumes of data in a tabular format. Meaning, when you have data stored in a CSV file format, and let's say if a CSV file has about 1 million records, the size of the file might be about a gig or 10 gigs. Let's consider. Now, if you try to store the same amount of data in an Apache Parquet file format, then the size of the file would be very much less, like maybe about 100 MB or 200 MB, like based on the type of compression that we use. So what happens is that when you convert a CSV file into Apache Parquet file, you are going to compress the data, and also the way the data is being stored completely changes. CSV is a row-based storage system, whereas Apache Parquet is a columnar storage file format. So what do I mean by that? Let's try to go through a blog which briefly explains with a pictorial representation of what I mean. So here is a blog that was written by Alexa Griffith. I was going through how to best represent the difference between columnar file formats and row-based file formats. So this image clearly describes about how the data is being stored in a row-based file format in columnar stores. Now let's take a simple database table where we have rows and columns being stored like this. Now, in a columnar file format, what happens is that an entire column, let's take a row name as one column, and this entire column's information will be stored as one stream of data, one block of data. Now, when I say one column as one block of data, so the row name, row one, row two will be one set of records, or one set of chunk of values, which will be one set, row name, row one, row two, one set. And similarly, one column and one more column, which is column one namespace one, namespace two, is in another chunk of data. And finally, the third chunk is for column two, value one, value two. So this is the columnar store. Now, what do we mean by row store? So in row store file formats, what happens is that the data is stored as they were. So we have rows where each and every row is stored as it is in the underlying storage. Uh, and they have their own perks of using, or they have their own usage in terms of storing the data. And when do we choose columnar file formats versus row-based file formats is something that we'll try to understand in the coming sessions, because that is very much important in terms of using the correct file format to do efficient reads and writes. Now, let's continue understanding further about pros and cons between CSV, JSON, and Parquet. And one more thing to remember is, if you try to open a CSV file, you will be able to view the contents of the file and read everything easily, since everything is a text. Whereas in Apache Parquet, everything is compressed, and so it is, and also CSV does not store any metadata about the records or the actual data, whereas Apache Parquet stores some level of metadata and the schema of the data as well. What I mean to say is, let's say if there are two columns in a CSV file, and if both of them have about 1,000 records, the CSV file represents only those two columns and those 1,000 records, and the file does not have any information about the count of records, the count of columns, the type of data types of those individual columns. Whereas if you store the same data in Parquet, at the end of the Parquet, there is some level of metadata stored about what is the count of records in this particular Parquet file, and what are the column names, and what is the data type associated with each and every one of these column names. So this kind of metadata is stored with each and every Parquet file. So it will be very much easier for us if we are trying to query the count of records, or if you're trying to understand automatically infer the data types. We'll try to understand more about these when we go do a practical scenario using Spark. Pros and cons. So this table briefly describes about uh, size differences between CSV, JSON, and Parquets, and efficiency of reads and writes between CSVs and Parquets, and which is best in terms of usage for developing big data applications using Spark or any other big data technology. So obviously, if you take a look at these comparisons, you will come to a conclusion that Parquet will be the winner because of its efficient way of compressing the data and storing the data in big data systems. And as per Apache Parquet documentation, Apache Parquet is specifically designed keeping in the mind of big data technologies, and it is well built or well designed for storing the data in HDFS. So if any one of you are coming from a big data background, we know that the data in HDFS is stored in the form of blocks, where each and every block is of 128 megabytes. Now, based on some assumptions or some fundamental rules of HDFS, Apache Parquet was built, but at the same time, Apache Parquet was built to evolve and adapt to any type of new compression that comes in future. And the default type of compression that Spark uses with Apache Parquet files is snappy compression. We need not worry about the internals of how the data is being stored in Parquet, but we need to understand the type of compressions that are available with Parquet, like gzip, snappy compressions, and how the data is being stored and what kind of metadata can be accessed with Parquet. But this presentation gives you a brief overview about the difference between all the three. And if you want to understand more about Parquet file format, there is a brief explanation about the properties and how Apache Parquet is efficient for using in big data applications in these two documentations. Databricks provides brief documentation about how Parquet is widely used in Databricks as well as in Apache Spark. And Parquet documentation gives internal details about how the data is exactly stored. So that's it for the session, guys. Thank you so much. See you soon.